Hello and welcome to our first week on the theme of Reign of God for Awakened. As we begin this thematic section, perhaps it's most important to begin with defining terms. So what is often translated as the kingdom of God in our English New Testament actually is the Greek word basileia, the basileia of God that's often translated as kingdom. Now, there's been a growing movement amongst scholars and theologians not to translate basileia as kingdom because kingdom necessarily puts God as our king and us as God's subjects. If we primarily see ourselves as children of God with inherent worth and dignity, seeing ourselves as subjects with God as our ruler doesn't quite compute. Moreover, if we see God as our king, that's very masculine language, and we, of course, see God as beyond the gender binary. So some scholars and theologians advocate for using the term kingdom, the kingdom of God, K-I-N-D-O-M, and that emphasizes our relationality within the kingdom of God. We are all kin, we are all children of God, we are all family. For me, that loses some of the political connotation that we get with kingdom, although I love the emphasis on us all being bound relationally. Some scholars and theologians advocate for the term realm, the realm of God, and that certainly brings back some political connotations, but to me, realm feels a bit otherworldly, like it's in a different realm. I like reign of God, R-E-I-G-N, the reign of God, because it has political connotations and it implies that God reigns over the earth and God reigns over our heart. The basileia of God. I think it's also important to note that all of these, I think, are authentic interpretations and translations of the word basileia, but basileia can also be translated as empire, God's empire. Now, if we hear that, Jesus talking about the reign of God, God's empire, the basileia of God, we should also be thinking, I wonder, wasn't there another empire in Jesus' day? Of course there was, right? The Roman Empire. And so whenever Jesus is talking about the basileia of God, the reign of God, God's empire, he's talking about an order that is in contrast to the Roman Empire. And this, folks, is what got Jesus into all kinds of trouble because he was proclaiming loyalty to God and to God's empire, to the reign of God on earth, in contrast to the Roman Empire. See, the Romans brought the great Pax Romana, the great Roman peace, through conquest and violence. They saw a land that they did not possess, a people that they did not control, and they conquered that people and took their land. As long as those people were amenable enough, they became Roman. If they weren't amenable, then the Romans killed them. That's how the great Pax Romana worked. Jesus talked about the reign of God that was brought about not through violence, but through the presence of justice. That peace was ultimately achieved through justice, not through violence. And he spent his whole ministry speaking about that. And so whenever people were proclaiming loyalty to the basileia of God, they were saying that they were citizens first in God's empire, in the reign of God, in the basileia of God, before they saw themselves as Judeans or certainly as Romans, that their primary identity was in God and God's reign, God's basileia. Now look, the Roman Empire was not a place where you could have divided loyalties. The Roman Empire was a place that required ultimate loyalty to the Roman emperor and to the Roman Empire. And if you didn't do that, you were in all sorts of trouble. We often forget that if you were to go into major cities in the Roman Empire, there would have been a vertical pole outside of those cities. That pole was the base section for the cross. And if you spoke out against Rome, you would likely be executed for sedition. And you would have to carry the horizontal crossbeam, and you would put it up and you would be crucified. Those vertical poles were reminders that if you stepped out of line, you were going to be punished. You also might actually see people being crucified as you went into Roman cities. It was dangerous to speak out against Rome. But Jesus spoke out against Rome all the time because he said, God's basileia is what we are loyal to. We are citizens of God's basileia. We are children of God with inherent worth and dignity. And so we, as Jesus followers, must see our primary identity in the reign of God, the basileia of God, God's empire. We must see ourselves first there. Our primary identity must be as citizens of the reign of God. And so that necessarily affects how we interact with the world. It means that before our loyalty, our allegiance to a particular country, we are first loyal to God and to God's reign, to the values of God's reign. It means that whenever we see things happening in our country or in other countries or in certain political parties that do not align with the reign of God, that we've got to call it out, even if it's our own political party, right? That we've got to be loyal first to the values of the reign of God. Now, this section is all about politics and how our faith and our politics interact. And I know that that can make some people feel a bit uneasy, and that's because churches have historically done a really bad job of actually engaging with politics in helpful ways. And I find that a lot of people really misunderstand the whole concept of the separation of church and state. And so this week our spiritual practice is to reflect on that a little bit and to spend some time with the First Amendment to the Constitution. So the First Amendment guarantees the freedom of religion. And what the First Amendment actually says is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, the Establishment and Free Exercise Clause. And what you may notice is that both of these have to do with how the government interacts with us, that Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion. That means that Congress cannot pass a law that establishes an official religion of the United States. They also cannot prohibit the free exercise of religion. That means that Congress can't pass laws that determine how we worship. What that does not mean is that we can't talk about political things in worship. We have to, actually. If we really believe that Jesus taught us to change this world, to make it more like the basileia of God, the reign of God, then that necessarily has to inform how we interact with the world. For instance, if we really believe that Jesus told us that no one should be living in such a state that they don't have enough to eat, that they don't have enough to drink, that they are economically depressed, that if we really believe that, then that means that we can't just support a food bank. It means that we have to look at the root causes. We have to look at economic policy in the United States and beyond and how that oppresses other people. And we have an obligation as people of faith to talk about the issues that Jesus instructed us were important. That can be tough, and yet That is what we are called to do, and we have every right to do that in churches and keep our 501c3 status. What churches can't do is act as a partisan arm of a political party, endorsing particular candidates, but churches can absolutely talk about politics, and certainly we, as people of faith, can talk about those issues in our personal lives. Because if we really believe what Jesus taught us, then that necessarily has to inform how we interact with the world, or you know what? We don't really believe it. Because if we really believe it, it has to inform every aspect of our lives. For we are citizens of the reign of God, the basileia of God, God's empire, and we are called to act like it. This week, do some reflecting on the establishment and free exercise clauses of the First Amendment. Think about how that interacts with your faith. Journal about it, pray about it, whatever it is that makes sense for you. And think about how it informs you as a citizen of the reign of God. May it be so.